I'm pregnant with Paul's child. The baby will be here soon. You need to leave him. My sister's sudden intrusion left me more exasperated than shocked. I couldn't believe she was not only having an affair with my husband but also boasting about her pregnancy. I didn't expect her to be so shameless. It's your fault for not getting pregnant. You brought this on yourself. You're a defective infertile. My sister and Paul sneered at me with contempt. Their closeness only intensified my disgust. There's a huge difference between you sisters. I was too stunned to speak. Paul's gaze was shockingly cold. I'm going to remarry Susan, so let's get a divorce. If that's what you want, fine. I'll let you go. But is it really Paul's baby? After all, As my sister and Paul left the house, I was left alone. But being alone allowed me to think deeply. Actually, about that. This is getting interesting. Just wait and see. You'll pay for what you did to me. My name is Emily. I married Paul, the VP at our company and the CEO's son, when I was 30. Paul's parents had always treated me kindly since I was just an employee, and it was through their introduction that we got married. My parents also blessed our marriage, and everything seemed to be going well. We continued working at the same place, and everything seemed perfect, right after our wedding. I never imagined I would soon be plunged into misery. At first, Paul was kind, but he changed after we got married. Paul, if you're going to be late, could you at least let me know beforehand? What? Why do I have to let you manage my schedule? I can do whatever I want. But I need to prepare dinner. Shut up. Don't tell me what to do. You're doing all this on your own. Yet, he would get angry when dinner wasn't ready when he wanted it. As I watched Paul's back as he stormed out, yelling, I sighed deeply. Right after our marriage, Paul started spending money recklessly. He delegated his work to subordinates and spent his nights partying. He often stayed out until morning, claiming it was for business. I thought he had settled down after college, but it seems he hasn't changed at all. What do you mean? I went to the same college as him. He was notorious for partying and had multiple girlfriends at the same time. It was so bad that Mr. Smith, the CEO, nearly disowned him. We all thought he had changed when he started working seriously. I realized that being too shocked to speak is a real phenomenon. I could hear my voice trembling as I managed to speak. I had no idea. My colleague nodded emphatically next to me. He was really serious when he joined the company. We all thought he'd learned his lesson. That's probably why Mr. Smith made him VP. I see. Emily, you're well liked in the company. Maybe he got complacent after marrying you, thinking he was guaranteed to inherit the business. Indeed, Paul's reputation worsened noticeably. There were even calls to fire him and promote the current senior manager. That jerk insulted me again. He needs to respect my position. At home, Paul constantly complained about Mike, the senior manager. As my direct supervisor, I felt quite awkward. Why is my wife working under that guy? I'm in accounting. Even though I was trembling from his yelling, I still tried to argue back, which he clearly didn't like. Paul slammed his fist against the wall, making a loud noise. Shut up. Don't talk back. Get him fired. You work with him every day, you can figure something out. That's impossible, he's a decent person. Don't side with him just because you're my wife. Paul only complained and made no effort to improve. Moreover, he hadn't contributed any money to the household since we got married. I managed all our expenses with my salary. While I could handle it for now, the future worried me. Could you please contribute at least a little to the household? Even just for groceries and utilities? What? Why should I give you my money? You have a job. You can't say that. We're married, aren't we? At least split the living expenses with me. For the first time, I felt like I stood my ground against Paul's anger. I was paying for all the groceries and utilities, and it was truly a financial struggle. Living expenses should be shared, not shouldered by one person. But Paul didn't understand. He probably didn't even try. To him, I was just a pawn for inheriting the company. Did you marry me just for my money? Of course not. It's just hard to maintain the standard of living you want on my income alone. I'm just asking for some cooperation. Shut up. I hate poor people like you. Don't show your face around me for a while. This was going nowhere. Yet, I was hesitant to talk to his parents. They're good people, and I didn't want to worry them or strain our relationship because of Paul. They were as important to me as my own parents. If they confronted Paul, he would likely take it out on me. That would be unbearable. The house we lived in was built by his parents. They paid for it and left the details to us. At that time, Paul was still reasonable, and it was fun to make decisions together, but that seems like a distant memory now. However, out of gratitude to his parents, I'll keep trying a little longer. I renewed my resolve and headed to work. 3 years passed while I endured Paul for the sake of his parents. Paul's behavior only got worse, and he became notorious as a spoiled son. Apparently, he even bragged about not contributing money to the household while out drinking. Because of this, I was seen as weak and unable to manage my husband, or pitted as a woman stuck with a useless man. Even while shopping, I felt like strangers were gossiping about me. Some employees also looked down on me for not being able to control Paul. How can she let her husband do whatever he wants? If it were me, I wouldn't stand it. Maybe she's scared of being told to divorce. Even if she keeps quiet, she might become the CEO's wife one day. If that spoiled son becomes CEO, then the CEO's wife would basically run the company. That's like a takeover. She seems quiet, but she's scary. Complaining to Paul only led to more yelling, and if he became CEO, the employees would surely suffer. So they directed their dissatisfaction and anxiety at me. Emily, you look pale. Are you all right? Oh, Mr. Smith, yes, I'm fine. If you have any problems, feel free to talk to me. Yes, thank you. Even though my in-laws subtly looked out for me, I still couldn't bring myself to discuss Paul with them. I kept postponing the conversation, thinking I could endure it, but it left me feeling guilty, as if I was hiding something. Unable to express my situation well, I grew distant from them. Our interactions became strained, and it pained me to see their worried expressions, knowing I caused it. They're such good people, yet I'm making them suffer. Still playing the good girl, huh? Does she really want to be the CEO's wife even with such a bad husband? Maybe that spoiled son was right about her being a gold digger. She even had a house built for her. Work had become an increasingly uncomfortable place. I started dreading going to the office. The only saving grace was that my direct supervisor, Mike, treated me with a very neutral attitude. Paul's nemesis, Mike, the senior manager, treated me with a strictly professional demeanor, even though I felt out of place. With the distance growing between me and my in-laws, and becoming the subject of gossip, his calm and business-like attitude was a relief. Emily, could you make copies of these documents? Yes, Mike. Look at her, being nice to both Mike and Paul. Such a people pleaser. She's just trying to cover all bases, in case one of them becomes CEO. Wow, she's so ambitious. I just focus on doing my job. No matter what they say, I'm just working. I'm not doing anything wrong. Even telling myself this repeatedly, my hands still tremble. I heard that my in-laws told Paul, at this rate, we can't let you take over the company. Paul, furious and red-faced, relayed this to me. This is your fault. They wouldn't say this if you had a child by now. I couldn't understand why it had come to this. Paul came home late every night. It wasn't easy to conceive a child under those circumstances. Why is it about that? Your parents just want you to be serious about your work. Are you saying I don't work hard? You're kidding me. I'm busier and contribute more to the company than you. I make a better salary too. You can't understand my job. When Paul got like this, he was uncontrollable. I had to wait for him to vent his anger like a spoiled child. As I braced myself for the storm to pass, Paul continued to shout. It's your fault. You can't have kids. Get fertility treatments or whatever, just produce an heir. But that's... Don't talk back. Once again, Paul started throwing things around like a tantrum-throwing child. So I crouched down and covered my head to avoid getting hit and injured. Okay. I'll get fertility treatments. Will you cooperate? Why should I have to do that when it's your fault? You're the defective one. Don't mock me. I was scared of Paul's rage, but I was also overwhelmed with exhaustion and exasperation. Why did I have to endure this? My in-laws meant well, but their efforts seemed to backfire. But no one could have predicted Paul's reaction. Doing as he said would temporarily calm him. I resigned myself and became compliant to Paul's demands. A year into starting fertility treatments as Paul demanded. Tests showed my body was fine and capable of conceiving. Doctors suggested Paul might be the issue, but he refused to get tested. Paul's moodiness and outbursts made it difficult for me and the doctors to press the issue. Paul, suspecting infertility, told me to see another doctor, but every hospital I went to gave the same results, only making him more irritable. Could you please come to the hospital with me, just once? There might be things we can't see when I'm alone. I had endured Paul's moods for a long time, but one day I decided to take a different approach and asked him politely. What? I'm busy. I don't have time to deal with your mess. But without your help, we can't do IVF. My eggs are fine, so we need to move to the next step. I know it's a bother, but could you help just once? Framing it as a step in my treatment rather than focusing on his potential issues seemed to work. He frowned slightly but watched me closely, glaring as if trying to gauge my intentions. You're paying for this treatment, right? Of course. It's my problem, so I'll take full responsibility. Fine. I'll go then. His arrogant attitude was infuriating, but I finally managed to get him to the hospital. Always talking about money, it's obvious who the real gold digger was. However, seeing my eagerness to have his child seemed to please him. He loved being the center of attention. No matter how old he gets, Paul remains childish and immature. Even at the hospital, he begrudgingly followed the instructions and then left abruptly, ignoring both me and the doctor's attempts to stop him. In the end, I was left alone to hear the doctor's explanation, feeling completely lost. So when the next event unfolded, I wasn't shocked. Long time no see, Emily. Susan. What are you doing here? One day, my sister Susan showed up at my house unexpectedly. Her large belly and proud smile gave me a bad feeling. She had always been a free spirit, living off our parents without working. However, since I got married to Paul, she stopped coming around to our parents' house. At first, my parents were worried, but knowing Susan's tendency to party, they assumed she was just staying with another boyfriend and eventually gave up worrying. But to find her pregnant all of a sudden was unexpected. Her due date seemed imminent. I'm pregnant with Paul's child. The baby will be here soon. You need to leave him. They must have planned this. Paul, uncharacteristically home, held Susan and sneered at me. Susan's right. A woman who can't get pregnant is useless. I've stayed with you out of respect for my parents, but I've had enough. You've spent all this money on treatments and still aren't pregnant? Paul's fed up. My sister's triumphant smile and Paul's condescending look disgusted me. Their closeness and pettiness were beyond infuriating. She's right. We were tired of waiting for you to get pregnant. You're a defective infertile. The venom in their words was astounding. They seemed intent on hurting me. We don't need a defective woman like you anymore. We're getting remarried, so let's get divorced. I was at a loss for words. I knew he was unfaithful, but to have an affair with my sister was unthinkable. Susan had always been overly friendly with Paul, but this was beyond my imagination. All right. I'll make the arrangements. Just give me a little time. Seeing me give in, they looked pleased. What drives them to go to such lengths? I never did anything to harass or hurt them, yet it's shocking to realize they hated me enough to treat me this way. Hurry up. Stress is bad for the baby. If you have any decency, you'll pack your things and leave quickly. Give us your blessing for our new life. Hearing the word decency from Paul was astonishing. Listening to these two lecture me on morals and propriety was the ultimate insult. Actually, could you leave now? You're useless here. Go back to your parents. They always coddled you. So they'll take care of their little failure. Susan's words made my blood boil. My parents always supported my quiet dedication to my studies. But the same goes for my sister. Our parents worried about her and scolded her for staying out late every night. Yet they still cared for her deeply. I never felt that their love was unequal. If anything, I often felt that despite my sister's obvious delinquency and my reputation as a model student, there was so little difference in their treatment of us that I felt less loved in comparison. So, what are these people talking about? Suppressing my urge to shout, I try to stay calm. It will take time to pack and explain the situation to everyone. Please wait a little longer. Feigning dejection, I noticed the delight on their faces. Susan, in particular, couldn't hide the smile creeping onto her face despite her attempts to look annoyed. Her expression twisted as if she was thoroughly enjoying tormenting me. I don't want to see your miserable face anymore. Paul chimed in, following Susan's exaggerated voice. If my Susan and the baby get stressed, it would be terrible. Fine, we'll stay at a hotel tonight. Just get out quickly, all right? They said what they wanted to say and left the house. The house that Paul's parents had bought for us. They must have hoped it would encourage their son to be responsible. And they surely cherished it. My parents also worried about my sister. Both of them disregarded everyone's feelings. I'll get my revenge, definitely. If that's what you want, fine. I'll divorce you. I wanted the divorce anyway, so this was welcome. But I won't let those two be happy. Just you wait. I'll make you see hell. I started preparing. I packed my things and left the house quickly, but I delayed the divorce proceedings with various excuses. In the meantime, I gathered evidence and prepared my case. Susan was very pregnant, so she would likely give birth during my preparations. They had no sense of planning. Unmarried, giving birth would be difficult, but they didn't seem to grasp that. Despite constantly harassing me to hurry up with the divorce, they didn't seem desperate. Truly pathetic people. I don't care if they struggle, but is it really Paul's baby? Because he... Curious, I decided to consult his parents. They had been talking to me about the situation, so it was a good opportunity. Preparations were complete. All that was left was to make them see hell. A month passed quickly, and I received news that Susan had given birth. What are you doing here? Still clinging on when you haven't even divorced Paul yet? When I entered the hospital room, Susan scowled. But she couldn't hide her smirk, clearly enjoying the chance to mock me. Paul, too, gave me a hostile look, supporting Susan. I don't know what you told my parents, but stay out of our lives. I got scolded because of you. Maybe it's because of his actions. There's no point in saying it, so I kept quiet. Oh, my sister might be a stalker, Paul. It's a problem. I have Susan now. These two are really delusional. I suppressed a sigh, trying to keep my emotions in check. Congratulations on the baby. My words were met with condescending looks from both Susan and Paul. They won't be able to keep up that attitude for long. Excuse me. First of all, congratulations on the birth. Paul's parents entered the room. Following them were my parents. Sorry for barging in with so many people. We have something to discuss, and it's going to be a bit hectic from now on. Susan and Paul, confident in their victory, smirked at me. Dad, Mom. Your grandchild is finally here. Isn't that great? Please, hold the baby. Susan, already trying to ingratiate herself with Paul's parents, spoke in a saccharine tone. Their expressions were stern, and my father spoke up on their behalf. Susan, we have spoiled you too much. To think you would do something so terrible to your own sister. We thought we'd always support you. But this is the last straw. You are no longer welcome in our home. You are disowned. My mother began to cry at my father's words. I told you so many times to be considerate of others, but it was all in vain. What is this? Susan's eyes widened in shock at the sudden declaration of disownment. I can't believe you would say that to me after I just had a baby. I don't want to be associated with poor people like you anyway. Paul sided with my sister. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he glared at my parents. How dare you say that to a woman who just gave birth? Even if you're Susan's parents, I can't forgive that. Turning to Susan, he boasted. I'll protect you, don't worry. Paul. Lost in their delusions, they were oblivious to reality. I couldn't believe my sister, after being taken care of for so long, would call our parents poor. My parents must have been more shocked than I was, but they remained composed, likely prepared for this confrontation. Perhaps there had been more conflicts between my sister and our parents than I knew about. Don't think you're off the hook, Paul. You're disowned too. You won't inherit the company, and you're fired effective immediately. Don't ever show your face again. What? What are you talking about? Paul's face contorted in anger at his father's words. Susan turned pale and started trembling. They had insulted their own parents to secure a place of power, only to see it slip away. I struggled to keep from laughing at their panic. I'm the only heir. We have your grandchild now. The family is secure. What era are you living in? Paul's parents were visibly exasperated. Paul looked desperate, almost ready to beg them. Susan, still confused, kept glancing between Paul and his parents. If you were competent, we might have considered leaving the company to you, but it was a mistake. We'll leave the company to someone trustworthy. This is a joke. You can't do this. Finally, Paul's temper exploded, and his angry shouts echoed through the room. But his father and mother, seemingly used to this, didn't even flinch. I'm already telling people I'll be the CEO. You can't do this. You made that decision on your own. We never agreed to it. Paul's mother, who had been quiet until now, stood firm. You've borrowed money claiming you'd become CEO. Find a job and pay it back yourself. We can't support you anymore. So, impossible. Given Paul's extravagant lifestyle, it wasn't surprising he had debts. Even though he earned a good salary as VP, his love for luxury and women likely far exceeded his income. I had heard he secretly bought cars and apartments, so who knows how much debt he had. Finally, Susan seemed to grasp the situation and glared at Paul, abandoning her previously sycophantic attitude. This isn't what we agreed on. What's going on? Why did I even have this baby? But Paul was too preoccupied to care. He was completely absorbed in shouting at his parents. You told me to prove my bloodline if a grandchild was born. I even did the tests for that. What was the point? Susan's face went pale. Clearly, she couldn't afford for tests to be done. What are you talking about? I didn't know about this. Susan's shrill voice caused Paul to frown. He glared at her, annoyed, as if she were an inconvenience. Their previous camaraderie seemed to vanish. It's obviously my kid, so there's no problem. Why are you freaking out? Just stay quiet. Actually, about that. The doctor, whom my father had called, entered the room with a troubled expression. A friend of Paul's parents, he had agreed to help us with our plan for revenge. Susan, your child is not biologically related to Paul. What? The room fell silent. Susan gasped, and Paul broke into a cold sweat. The doctor's words left both of them pale and stunned. Seeing my chance, I pulled out the photos I'd kept hidden in my bag. What's this? What is that? The photos featured my sister. There were dozens of pictures of her with various men. Some showed them entering hotels together, but while the woman was consistently my sister, the men were not always Paul. Though she seemed to have toned down her activities after becoming visibly pregnant. Her ex-boyfriend had hired a detective to investigate her infidelity. I had obtained the results by covering the investigation costs. Your ex-boyfriend, who you dumped after getting pregnant, hired a detective. I have testimonies from him and other men if you need them. Paul looked at Susan with murderous eyes. Though he appeared as a victim, he too had to face consequences. And remember when we went to the hospital for fertility treatment? I have those test results too. What? Test results? You never told me. Preliminary tests are necessary for IVF. It's standard procedure. The doctor had tried to explain this to Paul. But he ignored the doctor's words and left on his own. His selfish actions led him to this situation. It was his own fault. Your sperm motility is very low. The doctor said it's likely male infertility. If you don't believe it, check the test results yourself. No, that's a lie. Paul's reaction was even funnier than I had imagined. Paul's face turned pale as he snatched the test results from my hand with trembling fingers. His eyes widened as he repeatedly scanned the contents, and sweat began to pour from his entire body as he read further. His lips quivered, and he looked ready to collapse. DNA tests also confirmed the child isn't yours. The father is likely one of the men in these photos. I said to Paul, who was in shock after discovering his infertility. Paul shoved the test results back at me and turned to shout at my sister. "You deceived me, you harlot." But Susan wasn't about to back down. "Shut up. It's your fault for being infertile." "That's a lie. It's because you're a slut." Paul, unwilling to accept reality, then turned his glare on me. He was truly busy with his anger. "Emily. You must be lying. How can I believe this piece of paper? You're just trying to get back at me. You're the defective one here." "Defective?" His words were so absurd that both our parents frowned. Whether he didn't notice or didn't care, Paul was oblivious to the reactions around him. The more he talked, the worse he made his own situation. My test results were normal at every hospital. If you don't believe me, go get tested at various hospitals yourself. I don't have time for that. Enough already. Finally, Paul's father raised his voice. "Enough. You should be ashamed of yourself. This is disgraceful. Don't embarrass us any further. We owe Emily an apology." Paul faltered at his parents' words. As his yelling ceased, Susan jumped in. "Because of you, my future is ruined. What are you going to do about it?" "Shut up, you slut. That's my line. You tricked me. Get out of here with your kid." What followed was a vicious argument. In the end, their relationship was built on money. Seeing their true feelings and greed laid bare was embarrassing to watch. Without money, you have nothing good about you. Don't act high and mighty. You washed-up party girl. Both sets of parents were left shaking their heads in disbelief. I'm at a loss for words. How did they end up like this? The baby is the real victim here. The child is innocent. I shared their concern. It was worrying to think of a child growing up with such parents, and I doubted they could even raise a child properly. Ignoring our concerns, Susan turned her attention to me. Apparently, she cared more about herself than her child's future. "This is all your fault for bringing him into our lives. My life is ruined because of you. Take responsibility." Paul grabbed Susan's shoulder. He looked like he was about to hit her. "What did you say? Don't touch me, you infertile jerk." The absurdity was overwhelming. I let out a long sigh, releasing all the frustration I had held back. Your actions are your own responsibility. If anything, you owe me for all the trouble you've caused. What? Don't be ridiculous. You've always looked down on me. I've hated that look in your eyes since we were kids. If anyone looked down on me for being overly serious, it was my sister. Maybe she had her own issues with me and our parents. What a coincidence. I've always hated the way you belittled me and treated me with contempt. What are you saying? You're such an unlikable woman. No wonder you're getting dumped. This kind of double standard was exactly what defined her words. Nothing she said made any sense anymore. Talking is a waste of time. Let me get straight to the point. I've decided to hold you both accountable. I handed copies of the legal documents for the alimony claim, prepared by my lawyer, to both Susan and Paul. I also filed for divorce from Paul. Knowing that trying to resolve this with discussion would be futile, I took the firm approach. Both of you will pay every cent you owe. The amount was small compared to the years of suffering and mistreatment I'd endured, but the two of them exploded in rage. You're suing your own sister for alimony? That's outrageous. You gold digger. You just want money, don't you? I didn't care about the money, I just wanted to make them live in hell. Judging by their reaction, this was the most effective way. Their parents, unable to bear the sight of their pathetic outbursts any longer, spoke up. What you did to Emily was far worse. Be grateful it's only this much. How dare you, after having an affair with your sister's husband? Have some decency. However, reprimands from their own parents had no effect on these selfish individuals. Their eyes blazed with a sense that everyone else was the enemy. Seeing them in a half-mad state, hair disheveled and shrieking, was horrifying, even though I had prepared for it. If we're strangers now, then stop acting like parents. Exactly. You have no say in our lives anymore. Had they shown any remorse, they might have been forgiven, and the disownment reconsidered. But they were too foolish to realize this. They prioritized their desires and petty pride, leading to their downfall, without even realizing it. Why is this happening? Paul's eyes met mine. I had a bad feeling. But Paul was quicker than I was. Paul glared at me with a murderous look and lunged at me. Emily, this is all your fault. Ah! I screamed instinctively. But the blow I expected never came. Mike. You're here too? Mike, who had been outside, restrained Paul. Looking down at Paul, who was now gritting his teeth in frustration, Paul's father spoke with sadness. Mike will take over the company. You can work to pay Emily her alimony. The person Paul despised most was Mike. He had always feared his position being threatened. Now that fear had become reality, and he finally lost his mental balance. Like a tantrum-throwing child, he began to thrash and scream wildly. But Mike, holding him down, remained unshaken. We knew he was difficult, but this is beyond belief. Are you all right? Please, take him away. Shortly after, security guards arrived. They took over from Mike and began escorting Paul out of the hospital. Only then did Paul realize his predicament. Paul broke free from the security guards and clung to my leg. The sight of his tear-filled, pitiful expression was deeply repulsive. I was wrong, please don't leave me. Don't you have any pride? Mike voiced my thoughts. He pulled Paul off me and protectively put an arm around my shoulders. Paul seemed to realize the full extent of his situation. You bastards. Don't think you can just laugh this off. As he was dragged away, I hoped I would never have to see him again. I could only pray the court proceedings would go smoothly. Susan, left in the hospital room, paled at the sight of Mike's arm around my shoulders. You've been seeing another man, haven't you? You're mistaken. She hasn't done anything dishonest. I'm the one pursuing her. Hearing this made me blush. I lowered my head to hide my reddened face, feeling embarrassed. My parents, Paul's parents, and Mike all looked at me with warmth and support. Later, both Paul and Susan were disowned and burdened with debts and alimony payments. Paul intended to marry Susan, but she left him, uninterested in a man without money. She even abandoned her child, leaving him at the hospital. My parents took in the baby and named her Ashley. She was a beautiful little girl. We had planned to take her in, so it wasn't an issue. But witnessing my sister abandon her own child at the hospital left me astonished at how terrible a person she truly was. Clearly, she wasn't fit to raise a child. While my parents primarily cared for Ashley, I also helped out since I had moved back after my divorce. I continued working for Paul's parents' company, maintaining a good relationship with them. They, too, treated Ashley as their grandchild. With everyone's love, she grew up well. Susan, to pay my alimony, worked in a nightclub but soon became infatuated with a young man and disappeared before completing the payments. Paul struggled with debt and alimony, and the women who were after his supposed future wealth abandoned him. His financial situation seemed hopeless, and his creditors were losing patience. Rumors circulated that he might disappear like Susan. Years later, I married Mike. We had 2 children and lived a happy life. Okay, we're going to Grandma's house today. Yay! I'm going to play games with Ashley. Just don't be too demanding with your sister, okay? My relationship with Ashley was wonderful, and my children adored her. Emily, watch your step. Thank you, honey. Mike remained as kind and caring as ever, even after years of marriage. He cherished me, saying he loved my inner strength. I knew that with him, I could overcome anything and always be happy. I felt it was a reward from the universe for enduring that nightmare. I love you. I love you too. I had finally found my happiness.